Hello, viewers and listeners. Welcome to another episode of Pathways to the Ivies. Today, on this episode, we have the extremely talented, extremely competitive, and the most beautiful soul that I know, Shanza Khan. Let me introduce this wonderful woman standing in front of you or sitting in front of you. So, meet Shanza N. Khan, a distinguished professional who wears multiple hats and is a founder of Eye on Ivy, a premium Education Counseling Institute. Shanza holds an MA in public policy from the mighty Harvard University, where she received a fully funded Dean's Fellowship, where Dean's Fellowship, Jane Mansbridge Award, and Roy Scholarship. She also graduated Summa Cum Laude in economics from Emory University when she was just 19 years old. Her outstanding achievements have earned her memberships in prestigious organizations such as Omicron Delta Kappa, National Leaderships and Honors Award, and Omicron Delta Epilepsy International Economics Honor Society in the USA. She has over 22 years of experience and is on our podcast to discuss about summer schools and the importance of summer schools and how can you go about choosing summer schools and everything that everybody needs to know. Shanza, I almost got breathless in introducing you. This is just fantastic to have you on the show. Welcome to the show, Shanza, and thank you so much for taking out the time to talk to our viewers and listeners. How about you go on and talk a little bit about yourself besides all these um, great achievements that you have? Because I know you for a while now, but how about you tell our viewers?
So, thank you, first of all, Rima, for having me on the show. I'm very, very honored. It's my journey is has been a blessing of sorts. So, um, it wasn't anticipated, it wasn't planned that I would graduate at 19. My path has been unconventional. In fact, I come from at that time, in the 90s, the outlook was more conservative. I would say in the sort that do your bachelor's from your local country and then go for your master's overseas. So it was not a planned journey. It's just that life happened. My mom had cancer. I ended up being sent to an uncle abroad. And the beauty of the American system is that at that time I was sent, and technically I belonged in high school. I was 16 years old. I actually went to, and this was in Yankton, South Dakota. The number of people in that village, I should say, you can't even call it a town with a population of 13,000, was I went to the community college and I lobbied that I've finished my senior Cambridge. This is I predate O levels, and technically I ought to be in college. So they were like, well, you haven't completed uh, 18 years of education. And I was like, why don't you let me have a go, take a chance on me? If I don't meet your standards, you can demote me and send me back to high school. And I felt very, very confident. I think senior Cambridge had prepared me fairly well. And as it happened, and because there was not much to do in Yankton, South Dakota, to be honest, um, I managed to do an associate's in business administration in 1 year instead of two. And I then transferred to Emory, because by that time my parents had shifted to Atlanta and I had to choose a school in Atlanta. I preferred Emory to Georgia Tech. That's another story. But the takeaway message is the American education system gives you a lot of liberty to negotiate at the individual level, whether it is in terms of your grades, your transcripts, as long as you're not afraid to ask. You can even ask for your assignments to be reevaluated and so on. So, I think here in South Asia, we take everything as very clear cut. It's been graded, it's done, it's so on. But in America, you can negotiate. So I learned that lesson early on.
That is a fantastic piece of advice, and I have to second you on that, Shanza. In fact, I'll tell you this nice case of the time that I was at university. And I remember, so I am good with numbers. What I'm not very good with is a lot of formulae, put in my face, and I'm like, oh, how do you do this? Like, that's just generally not something that I'm good at. And I remember I had a subject called statistics, and I went to this, the professor there at the university, and initially when I took the first midterm, I actually ended up getting a 45 on 100, which is like a big blow in my face, because I was like, this is way too low than, what I'm used to getting. And I went to the professor and I said, this is not done. Like, I don't like the score that I'm getting. And even though the highest in the class was only 55, still, so two things she did for me is she actually curved the grade, meaning, she gave me like a B minus from like a D, which technically should be. And I convinced her that, if I got just 25 people from my class to take a retest, she would administer a retest. And she actually did, because I went protesting and I asked everybody, and I said, you know what, you need to give me this retest, because 45 is a blow in my face. This can't happen, right? So I second you in terms of what you're saying, that, as long as you have the voice and the rationale, people are more open to listening to you and renegotiating, as long as you've merit or some thought
Absolutely.
process. So that's
Absolutely.
that's good to know. But let's talk about summer schools, which is what our topic for podcast is. Shanza, can you tell me, first of all, what really are summer schools? How are they different, especially in the US or anywhere in the world for that matter, than a regular college?
Mhm.
And do you think that experience is a good experience to have from the perspective of a child's growth intellectually as well as overall?
So that's a loaded and long question, Rima. I'm going to break it down as much as I can. Um, so let's begin with that there are many different types of summer schools. Um, there are competitive summer schools and there are pay your way in summer schools. Competitive summer schools are programs like Yale's YYGS, Yale Young Global Scholars Program, with a 6% acceptance rate, the MIT MITES program, and so on. These programs are very difficult to get into. Then you have non competitive summer programs. Keep in mind that almost every university in the United States and many other universities around the world now have summer school programs. And what a pay your way essentially means is even if you have an application process associated with it, as long as you're paying the fee, they will most likely take you in. Oxford, for instance, falls in that category. Prestigious name, but they will, unless you really mess up, they will take you in. And so, even your brand names, your Ivy names, Harvard has a summer program, Cornell has a summer program. Is it worth your while to attend those programs? Is it giving you an advantage in the admissions process? No, because admission officers know which are competitive programs and which are pay your way in programs. So the first thing you need to do is figure out what is your motivation for doing the program. If you are doing the program to give you an edge in the college admissions process, it must be a competitive program. If you are doing the program for your personal growth, and trying to figure out, do I really want to pursue this major? Okay, I think I want to explore biotechnology in this particular university. I'm going to take this particular course to find out more about it because it's not offered in my high school. That's a different motivation. But if it's a pay your way in program, it's not going to give you an edge in the college admissions process. Now, there are what we call things in between. What happens to those students, or what do we advise those students who can't get, who are targeting the competitive programs and are unable to make it in? What happens to them? Or what do we advise them? So, our advice to those students is you should target summer programs that give you college credit. There is, in fact, a question in the Common App that will ask you, have you taken college level credit courses? That allows you to, in fact, check that mark off. And preferably, if you have received a grade and you've shown that you've taken a university level course and you have done well, you are already signaling to the university, I can excel at that level, because that is something that they are looking for. Can you cope with college level rigor? The high school GPA does not give this information to the admissions office. In fact, that's one of the reason why there is standardized testing, because the academic curriculum varies so greatly. So my advice to students is, when you are looking for summer programs, and you are targeting the competitive programs, but the acceptance rates are almost as low as getting into a university itself, your backup plan should be applying to summer programs that give you college credit. In fact, you can use AI like ChatGPT. You can put in the different programs you're considering. I actually did this exercise a couple of weeks earlier, where a student was like, okay, I've gotten into this particular program of Columbia's, I've gotten into this particular program of Harvard's, and I've gotten into this particular program of Boston University's. Now, in terms of prestige and in terms of overall university ranking, BU would fall in the lowest of the cohort. But the BU program is the only one offering college credit. And in fact, when you ask that question to ChatGPT, it will reiterate that college admission officers will pay the most emphasis to the BU program and the least one to the Harvard program.
Wow, that is a pretty comprehensive answer. And I think you opened so many doors in terms of what you're saying. So, just to summarize what you're saying, there are three types of program. One is a prestigious program, one is a pay away program, and one is somewhere in between, which may or may not be very competitive, but does offer you a college credit. Ideally speaking, if you want an edge in the college game, you should get into a competitive program, which is a competitive summer school program. But if not, your backup should be where you end up getting a college credit. And if nothing works out, then probably pay your way in.
So, on the pay your way in, I am not, time is finite. I would say I would advise a student to do something else with their time if they don't do the first two. Depending on the major that they're applying, I would advise them perhaps to do independent research and take it towards publishing. That is now a big factor in the college admissions process, or to pursue a passion project, because the pay your way in summer school experience is not adding any value in the admissions process. It may add value, and I want to make this distinction. It may add value to your growth, it may add value to your learning. Is it adding value to the admissions process? That's a no.
But let's say if we have a student who comes early on, right? Because now these days, with so much of information on the internet, some students might be approaching you, say, as early as eighth grade, with this confused mindset that, hey, you know what, I'm like what, 10, 11? I don't know how old are you when you were in your eighth grade, right? But about that ballpark, do you advise you pay your way in summer school to somebody who comes this early on to you, just to figure out what they really like? Or your advice would still be something else instead of pay your way in?
So, my advice to first thing, what the audience should know, anything that you have done the summer before your ninth grade is not going to make it into your Common App, right? So, let's say you've done it during eighth grade or before. The Common App is not going to allow you to input it in. It is going to allow you to report the summer before ninth grade. So that's an important summer. And we don't want to waste any summers. So, but for kids who want that experience, and they're typically 13-year-olds at that particular time, rather than shelling out approximately $6,000 to $9,000, Rima, which is what this 2 week or maximum 3 week experience is going to be, to these kids normally are, is that whichever country they're in, you will find local summer schools over there. So, for example, in Pakistan, LUMS has a comprehensive 3 week summer program where you can take 8 different modules, whether it is fintech, whether it is robotics, whether it is animation. And the sort of program, in fact, I put my own son in it at exactly that time for him to figure out in a fun and non competitive manner. In fact, that is the time that I would suggest you don't want to throw in your child right away into the deep waters. You want them to kind of grow in this process. So the first introduction was through um, your national program, where you can choose the courses you want to explore and figure out, aha, this is exactly the major, or this is the majors I'm interested in, and hone that a little bit more. So it saves you money. I mean, 8,000, $9,000 is nothing to sneeze at. So if you're not getting bang for your buck, and I always joke, my maternal side are merchants from Bombay or Mumbai. And so we always look for, where can we get value for our money? Where are we going to get return on our investment? So if I'm not getting a return on my investment, eh, I'm going to look for, where can I get that value for less money?
Perfect. That actually is a great point. And that also clarifies a very important point, that local summer schools are not bad. You don't need to,
No.
because a lot of people are like, oh, if I'm not paying 10,000 bucks for a summer school, it's not a good summer school. Please explore local options, especially early on. It's absolutely okay to look at local summer schools and understand what you are really, really wanting to do, than just spend so much of money. That's a great point, Shanza.
Yeah, thank
Perfect.
you.
My next question to you is, so let's talk about the really, really competitive program. Can you list a few competitive programs for us, like the summer school programs for the audience, which you think are A, highly competitive, and B, if you can explain a general process for application, like what's a good time to apply? How can you go about building and applying to these schools? That would be great for all these kids.
So it's a very good question, Rima, but what you first need to identify is, what is the major you're going to be applying at undergrad. Now, yes, I know that you can even go in undecided. I tell my students that unless you're a WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, you should never go undecided. If you're brown, that's a definite no-no. Uh, you have to come across as very, very focused in your application, that this is exactly what I what I've done in my high school years. This is what I plan to do in my college, and this is what I'm going to do after I graduate. So that's the narrative. So the summer school, the competitive summer school that you're going to be applying for, is going to be very different according to your major. There is no set competitive summer school that is aligned for you. So if you're a STEM kid, the mites at MIT is the one that you will be targeting. If you are looking at politics, economics, you should be looking at the Yale Young Global Scholars. Now, Yale has now 2 additional programs. 3 years ago, so specifically for IR students. And now they have started a fellowship program for entrepreneurs as well. So these Yale programs are all very competitive, with usually a single digit acceptance rate. This actually shows or signals to the admission officers, when you get into a program such as this, that you've already made the cut. To your question, what does the process look like? And that's also a very good question. Many of these programs have 2 cycles. There is an early cycle and there's a regular cycle. my strong recommendation to all students is always, just like for universities, look at the early cycle. And it's almost like applying to university itself. There are a multitude of essays related to usually the major you're applying. Um, you have to get a counselor recommendation. And this is where this is not something you can wake up at the last minute and ask your school counselor. This can't be an independent third party counselor. So your relationships with your school counselor matters a lot. And you have to give them time to work on it. We also work within schools. And therefore, we have seen when we have the authority to really get into and draft an essay, we can make sure we're doing justice to the student. But for schools who are not that familiar with these programs, my advice to students is go in prepared. So, what you ought to be doing as a student, make sure you take your CV with you to your school counselor and highlight, okay, I'm applying for the international relations program. I have participated in these months, I've participated in these debates, I have won an honorable mention over here, I've won a best delegate over there, and you've kind of marked all of those achievements. Let's say you won the Harvard Crimson Essay Award or anything else related to IR, and you've maybe written an article for one of the newspapers and so on. So you mark those and then you take it to the school counselor and then you make your case. And you really have to sell yourself or market yourself and request that time, ma'am, sir, because it's not just your application. You can get everything right, but if the counselor has not put in the work, the ball will get dropped because there's a lot of emphasis on that recommendation. And so the application looks like anywhere between 2 to 4 essays uh, that you have to draft. These cannot be drafted at the last minute, just like universities' essays. You should be brainstorming which aspect is best showcasing your achievement, your values, your personality, and you should be working with a counselor, um, if not an independent counselor, then your school counselor, to make sure that the drafts are presenting the best version of you. And then, of course, there's the counselor recommendation. Now, what we've seen with some of these applications, particularly in this year's cycle, is that the advantage of applying early is just like Ivy League admissions. You can get, if you don't make the cut right away, you can get waitlisted to the regular round. So that gives you another shot at it. Um, and another piece of advice I would give students is look at the age eligibility for these programs. For many of these programs, you can't apply to them in grade 9, right? So you want to check what is the earliest you're allowed to apply. Is it 10th grade? Is it 11th grade? If it's 10th grade, make sure you apply in 10th grade, because if you get a reject, and I have a student who did receive a reject for YYGS the first year she applied, but got in the second year. So, um, unlike universities where you have just one shot at it, unless you're planning to take a gap year, the summer programs can be and should be almost like a 2 year cycle in my mind. So that's a key difference.
Wow. I think great points here that you brought up. Most importantly, apply as early as possible. I also know somebody who actually got rejected at YYGS in his ninth grade, but did get accepted at his 10th grade level. So the earlier the better. It's okay to get rejected at a program, and that does not close your doors for years. Do you advise taking the summer school between the summer of your 11th and 12th grade? Because sometimes parents really wake up late, they start looking out for resources lot later, and by that point in time 2 summers have already elapsed, which is this actually 3, the summer before ninth grade, the summer between ninth and 10th, and the summer between 10th and 11th. So now you only have one summer left. What should be the priority between applying to a summer school and preparing your application?
Rima, interestingly, there is data available out there on how NACAC, which is the National American Counselor Associations, they take data from all the universities on how students should be spending their summer. And 68% decided that they give the greatest value to internships.
Oh,
uh, 64% said that they give the greatest value to independent research. 56% put emphasis on traditional paid employment and jobs. 52% said academic programs for credit. So, when you are looking at what summer program one should be doing, or should I be paying emphasis to my college applications, the first thing I, as a parent or as a student, would be doing would be looking at my extracurricular profile and doing a mental check. So, for example, my checklist would look as follows: in the 10 extracurricular boxes for the Common App, do I have two internships related to my major? That's the first thing I'm doing a calculation of. Do I have published research? That's the third thing. Fourth thing, do I have a passion project? Fifth thing would be my summer program or a college credit program. So that's kind of, the top four. In fact, I might even put the research on top of the internship, once again, depending on the field. If I'm going towards aerospace engineering, you're not really going to find an internship for a high school student in that. So you have to kind of really see for what particular major what is applicable. But for the others, in case anybody is wondering what are the others, they would be demonstrated leadership in your school, in a club or society, as well as internationally. So, for example, if a student is a STEM related student, have you been accepted in a program like the Junior Academy of Sciences as part of the New York Academy that is showing demonstrated leadership at the international level? You need to make sure that if you're doing business, you're doing that at a business level, and so on. And then the last is a narrative arc for volunteer work. So the summer program, when I'm looking at, should I be doing this right before my senior year? Have I done the other most important things? Um, and then I will see, okay, I can manage, frankly, I would not use my summer just for applications. I would be using that summer wisely. But is the preference going to be given to, just a summer program versus an internship versus research? Ideally, I would in fact recommend the research needs to be done the summer prior, because the publication process is so long. That's the topic for another podcast, because publication needs to be in a peer-reviewed impact journal, not just in any journal, and that takes time. So planning is key to all of this. Um, just make sure your ducks are all aligned in a row.
that's some great answers and a good checkpoint or a checklist for all the parents to have, and even everybody else to have, just to know what is important from the perspective of college and make a wise choice. Another thing that you brought up in the answer previous to this is the importance of counselor recommendation. Now, I feel that personally, when I speak to a lot of parents, and even for that matter, counselors in the international belt, a lot of them are not aware how important that counselor recommendation is. A, and sometimes if they're not aware, parents don't know what should they ask the counselor to put in, because they're technically speaking, nobody is supposed to have an access to the recommendation that's written by the counselor. But just because sometimes the counselor is oblivious, some guidance needs to be given to them. So if a parent was probably, say, living in a very small city in one of the Asian countries where the counselor doesn't know what to do, and which to write. Could you, one, tell
Sure.
us the importance of the counselor recommendation and the weightage of a counselor recommendation in the summer school process, one? And two, what kind of activities should the parents insist on collaboratively working with the counselor to help them write? Of course, not know the content, but at least give them like a blueprint that can we include these, so that the recommendation really has that weightage. And
Sure.
it's a of all the things, I don't want an application to be rejected only because the counselor recommendation wasn't strong enough.
Right. So the counselor recommendation is a critical part of this process, Rima. I cannot emphasize this enough. And the problem is, as you said, usually it's an anonymous work. You don't have access, you're not supposed to have access to it. And many school counselors will not share. In fact, there is usually a rating rubric associated with it as well. Is this student in the top 1%, 5%, 10%, 25% of their class, and so on? So there's a rating rubric, and you don't know what is the counselor putting you down for, and that could just damage your entire application. And so your relationship with that counselor matters a lot. What should that counselor recommendation have? So the counselor recommendation for the field you are applying for, the first paragraph should be academic centered. Academic centered, beginning with your overall, starting with situating you overall within the class. Um, this student is in the top, 5% of the class, or, what's really great to hear is one of the best students I have known in my teaching career of 15 years. The more you quantify, the better it is. And frankly, for these sorts of programs, those are the kind of lines that they want to hear. So the first is the overall situation. Where are you in overall in your class, or in terms of the counselor's career? The second is in terms of the subject you are applying. So if you're applying for economics, political science, how are you doing in that subject in school? Obviously, if you're in ninth or 10th grade, you've not sat for an external exam. So the counselor has to give that information. How are you doing in that subject? So the academics are extremely important. That should be kind of your opening paragraph. Your second paragraph should be talking about intellectual curiosity as manifested by independent initiatives that has been demonstrated to the counselor. So this is where your CV, the parent, or whoever gives information to the counselor, because the counselor only knows you. If it's a teacher, they know you from the class. If the counselor, they know you, superficially. They may not know everything you've been up to. So this is where you were like, okay, this student, they travel to um, the Harvard Mun in Dubai, and they were a best delegate there. They represented the committees of X, Y, and Z, and that is what their knowledge is about. So that intellectual curiosity, or they did independent research on this particular topic. They connected with a local professor from this particular university, and are working with them on a project, even if that's not been completed at the summer application school level. That is okay. The idea is to show that you are going stretching yourself. So for example, even if you've taken a course on Coursera, on Udemy, and most of them are free of cost, this is where that information could go in. And then would come in character anecdotes. So if you're looking for public speakers and leadership qualities, this is where the counselor would give anecdotes from school, on how that student has gone above and beyond to demonstrate that leadership, maybe in a club or society or in a school event. Maybe there was a school month that was being hosted, and the child went out of the way as one of the organizers, as one of the hosts. So character traits and values are also very important. and is empathetic and is helpful and is promoting tolerance and all of that. So this is kind of how a counselor should go about uh, writing a recommendation. The more personal anecdotes they put in, the better. My worst nightmare when it comes to counselor or teacher recommendations is what I call the CCP, cut, copy, paste. And I see this uh, time and again, even when I'm looking at university admission letters. And I don't blame the teachers because many of them are visiting faculty and they work, particularly at the A levels. They work with several schools. And so they have so many requests for recommendations. And what they end up doing is they just swap the name of the student, um, and the rest of the letter remains the same. And you can tell it's a CCP because there is no personal information. It's about, oh, this student is very helpful. They will stay out of class to help a particular friend, to help students with their homework. But there is no personal information, that personal anecdote. The best friend fell sick, and the ex student went out of their. Put in the names, put in that information. That's what sets it apart.
Wow. And that's such a nice detailed format of what somebody can keep in mind. And that is, I'm sure if somebody just watches this part of the podcast, they will actually know how to craft a good counselor recommendation, whether it is for the summer school or whether it is just otherwise. So thank you, Shanza. That was
No,
some
no
great piece
worries.
of information. It was amazing. The another part that I would like to tackle about is the test prep score. So, I was just recently talking to a student who made it to the RSI, which is an MIT summer school, extremely competitive. I think less than 5% summer school. I mean, the acceptance rate. And he had taken the SAT, standing at a 1540. And then there's another student who had not. And, while they tried to kind of figure out, the only difference was that one had taken it and one had not taken it. Overall, at least in my head, their profiles look very similar. So and again, all of these summer schools, at least from what my understanding is, say the test prep score is good to have, but it's not mandatory. What I wanted to understand from you is, having a competitive SAT score or an ACT score for that matter, does it swing the application in your favor? When, especially for these summer schools, I'm not talking about the final admissions, those, that's a different process altogether, but for a competitive summer school, having that data point, is it important for them to make that decision?
So, if the application is, and these are particularly for STEM programs, you will see that, saying that you can submit your SAT as an optional requirement. Many of them, by the way, will require TOEFL for international students, or IELTS for international students, or the English SAT score for an international student. US residents and citizens, of course, are waived that requirement. Then I would suggest, yes, know that in today's day and age, anything which is considered or said to be optional should be looked at as mandatory. In fact, a new trend that we expect to increase over time is the optional video essay. So now, with once again AI tools available to students that are widely being used for essays, by the way, a note to counselors who are tuning in, you can use AI for counselor recommendations and it will not be held against you. I tell you that straight from UPenn, who has put this on their webinar. They say they're looking for counselors and for teachers. They're looking at content, not how it is, whether AI has been used to craft or not. Students, this does not apply to you. So they are now, you will see the rise of video essays and weeks. In fact, recently I helped a student apply to the IB Youth Advisory Council, which is a very competitive program. It's not a summer program, it's a year long leadership program when they had a requirement for 2 video essays in addition to 3 written essays. And so I think it's also to keep in mind, does your language follow through and is consistent with perhaps help you've gotten on your written essays, but are you communicating verbally the same way? So this is now, I expect that trend. We saw this coming in on the university side, Brown with their video essay, and Davidson with their video essay. But now I am seeing this with other extracurricular programs, and I expect this to uh, you know further infiltrate with the rise of AI help in essays.
Wow. So SAT is not just good to have, it's great to have, especially if they are saying optional and you're looking at a competitive STEM program. And please be uh, absolutely okay to put yourself out there. Your written essays should match your personality overall, and they can figure that out.
Yeah.
Counselors, you can use AI, absolutely. The content is more important than what how it's written. For students, AI is off the charts for you. Please don't use it. Maybe if you want to do a little bit of research, yes. But yeah, brainstorming is great because it's like having a live person, but not like copying. But overall, I think this was such an informative podcast. I learned so much because I was like, oh, this is also there. Oh, I didn't know this. Shanza, and I am so glad that you could make it to this. I'm sure there's going to be more requests about, how to write counselor recommendations or essay workshops or stuff like that. And we probably will get you for another podcast as and when we roll further. But thank you so much for your time. And I had a ball listening to you today. Thank you, Shanza, for giving out all that information. Really appreciate it. And thank you so much, guys, for listening. Hope you found the information useful. We're going to leave the email address and the Instagram bio ID for Ion Ivy. In case if you need anything in terms of counseling, feel free to reach out to the entire Ion Ivy team. We've been working with them for a while now, and we know we can vouch for their stellar admits and Shanza and our team. So thank you so much, guys, and thank you again, Shanza.